Hello and welcome to the Political Opinions podcast, where every opinion is given equal footing and political tolerance and debate are given their proper attention in a world where both are on the decline. Today's episode will cover different opinions on torture. Now, torture involves inflicting severe pain on an individual in order to gain information. Torture can also be done without the intent to gain information, and I all know we have those things we view as torture, be it a boring meeting, some difficult coursework, or the latest garbage TikTok trend. Despite these horrible events occurring, however, I will be focusing only on torture aimed at getting information. Furthermore, there will be common references to terrorists because they are the most prominent focus of this debate, although other cases are still valid. With all that said, let's waterboard our way through this episode. Sorry about that. Before we actually delve into the practice of torture, let's first take a look at the morality of it all. For those supporting the practice of torture, their belief in morality goes like this. Morality is subjective, and there is no universal set of morals, but rather they can be interpreted differently. Moreover, if torturing someone could save, say, hundreds of lives, some may view it as the moral option. This all links into points I will discuss later on. For now, however, just bear this in mind. Just as there is no universal truth as to whether a Jaffa cake is a cake or biscuit, so too is there no universal truth around morality. Now, of course, this horrible dilemma on Jaffa cakes could be solved through torturing the CEO of McVitie's to get a definitive answer. Of course, for legal reasons, that's a joke. But for the point of this episode, torture can be used to gain information. In some cases, an argument can be made that only through torture can intelligence sometimes be obtained. This of course rests on the belief that torture actually produces reliable information, and if said information can save lives, then some may deem it worth it. Now, the common example thrown around here is the torturing a terrorist to find a dirty bomb. While this type of scenario is unlikely to occur, the wider point on it still stands. Terrorists are seen as the worst of the worst in modern society, and as such some believe that they deserve to be tortured for what they have done or may want to do. Furthermore, on a practical note, some may argue that torture deters and punishes terrorists while obtaining information. Think of torturing terrorists as a really nice Marmite sandwich. Some may oppose it outright, while others may view it as the perfect response to a hungry stomach, or in this case, the risk of death and destruction. Moving on from food to philosophy, a utilitarian argument can certainly be made here. In a very simplified matter, utilitarians prefer outcomes that produce more net good than net bad. And if torturing someone produces a greater good overall, say saving a lot of lives or gaining intel on other bad people, then utilitarian argument can certainly be used to justify terrorism. Taking one life or torturing one life to save dozens or hundreds or whatever more definitely to some produces more good than harm, at least in the abstract. Another philosophical basis for torture comes from consequentialists. This paradigm of thought believes that no action is inherently good or bad. All that matters is the outcome. Dancing in front of a phone is not inherently bad, but knowing that this will one day come to further degrade humanity with awful TikTok dancing means the action can be viewed as ultimately bad. Inversely, if torture produces a good outcome, the action itself cannot be seen to be wrong, but done for what the Neighbourhood Watch Alliance would say is the greater good. Now, if you didn't get that, it was a Hot Fuzz reference, and there is no debate on the fact that it is the best film of all time. What there is, however, a debate on is the ever-enjoyable question of human rights. For those advocating the use of torture, there is a belief that human rights are conditional. Essentially, you have to abide by human rights in order to maintain your own. If you have done something worthy of torture, your right to be free from torture is voided, and you shall receive the cruel and unusual punishment you deserve. Viewed in isolation, that sentence sounds like it would fit very well in George Orwell's 1984 book. There is a case, however, that torture can exist and be used appropriately. If it is used very carefully, and only at specific times of need, then it can produce the benefits outlined without the costs I will come on to. By never having it in the first place, some say we leave ourselves exposed, but by having it as a final option, there is a chance it could be used to positively impact society. Now, would it ruin your day if I said that everything I just told you was wrong? Well, those opposing torture would believe so. Let's start with why they believe the moral argument to be wrong. But simply, they do. There is a belief that morality to some is universal. There is a definitive right and wrong, and torture comes under the list of things that are always wrong. Without going philosophical nerd on you, let's just say that under certain moral parameters, such as moral universalism, universal morals, an argument exists that torture can never, ever be a good thing to do morally. They may also claim the argument for intelligence is supposedly wrong, because there is a belief it does not work. Intelligence obtained by being tortured is something that is likely to be unreliable. People are more likely to say anything they want that will stop the pain than really give useful information. People may be resistant to torture, at which point it's useless in terms of gaining information, and ultimately torture does not guarantee useful intelligence, that's the word, but it does guarantee unnecessary pain and suffering, and as such is wrong. Now at this point you may be thinking, what about the amazing example of terrorists? Well, to answer that, an argument is made that no one should ever be tortured regardless of what they have done. The moral case against terrorism is that we are essentially better than them. We are the good guys and them the bad guys. If actions such as torture are used, however, that argument collapses, and it is now much harder to see who is in the right and wrong. Therefore, we must be better than them and not stoop to their level. Turning back to philosophy for a second. For utilitarians, firstly, an argument can be made that torture may produce more harm than good. But given it's scenario specific, I'll instead move to this. Machiavellian thinking is dangerous. If we always say that the end justifies the means, we open a door to far worse actions in the future. Torture is one such thing where allowing it at all possesses the risk of worse actions done in the name of the greater good. Now another argument against torture is that of deontology. This is essentially moral universalism in a different way. There is a belief that there are definitive good and bad actions. Torture is therefore always bad, and cannot be good regardless of the outcome. Coming back to consequentialists, there is also a view that, to some, torture can be bad. If all we have at the end is a tortured person and nothing more, the action was therefore bad, because it didn't produce a greater net good. Similar to this general belief on moral universalism, so too is there a belief that human rights are universal. Some believe that human rights can never be taken away for whatever reason, and that as such, torture is always wrong, because again, it's against human rights. We must defend human rights unconditionally, and removing them for any reason is wrong. All of this culminates then in the future. Put simply, it's worse than one before Fortnite was made. Torture is a slippery slope, if you will, that will only get worse over time. It causes untold pain and suffering for everyone involved, and is something so arcane that it should be left to the history books. When directly comparing these points, therefore, we get some interesting ideas. On the point of morality, we have two disagreeing points. One that morality is subjective and can be interpreted differently, and one that morality is universal and should always be present, and as such torture is either subjective morally or universally wrong morally. On this question of intelligence, some believe that torture may be the only way of obtaining important information, and that if the intelligence can save lives, it's worth it. However, those disagreeing believe that intelligence isn't really a valid argument. The intelligence may be incorrect, intelligence may not be obtained, and torture does not guarantee essential information is true or going to be present and helpful in any way. On the point of terrorism, some believe terrorists deserve to be tortured for what they have done. It deters and punishes terrorists while obtaining useful information. However, those disagreeing believe that no one should ever be tortured regardless of what they have done, and we cannot sink down to the level of people we claim to be terrorists. From the utilitarian standpoint, some believe that if torture produces a greater net good, then the action was not bad. Torturing one life to save many more may be worth it. However, those disagreeing would say we must avoid Machiavellian thinking that the end justifies the means, because this ultimately opens the door to something far more dangerous. On this question of deontology and consequentialism, some believe that consequentialism dictates no actions are right or wrong, only the outcomes, and if torture produces a good outcome, the action was not wrong. However, those supporting deontology believe that there are definitive actions that are right and wrong, and as such torture is always wrong. Furthermore, some consequentialists may claim that torture produces more harm than good, at which point again it is bad. On this question of human rights, some believe that people who have committed acts worthy of torture have voided their rights. Human rights are contingent upon the fact that you also follow them. However, those disagreeing would argue that human rights can never be taken away for any reason. Torture is against human rights and therefore always wrong. And finally, on the question of what happens in this beautiful future we've created, some believe that torture, when used appropriately, can have positive impacts for society. It should be used carefully and only at the worst times, but having it is more useful than not having it, because of the reasons mentioned before. However, those disagreeing would argue torture is a slippery slope and will only get worse over time. It causes pain and suffering for everyone involved and should never be allowed to be present. Overall, those who support the use of torture believe it can be useful in certain scenarios, and that morality is not a universal thing. Torture has certain benefits, and when applied properly, it can be useful. However, those opposing it believe torture is not only always morally wrong, but does not produce the practical benefits worthy of any sacrifice to said morality. It is highly likely torture does occur without us ever knowing, and the knowledge of that will produce different reactions to different people. Whether or not it is worth it, of course, is open for debate. As always, I would love to hear your thoughts on the topic in the comments or on Twitter. If you enjoyed this video, please follow, like and subscribe depending on what platform you're on. Be sure to check back next Monday for another episode. Thank you all for listening, and I hope to see you soon. The greater good.